Welcome to AIADA's Auto Talk. I am Dan Barson, your host for today's program. Today's presenter, Dale Pollak, has been a dealer, technology entrepreneur, and also a bestseller author. Pollak has helped over 10,000 auto dealers in North America make dramatic improvements in their used and new car departments. Dale also helped build Digital Motorworks, and I believe he's best known for his work with vAuto, and he now sold that company to Cox, and he serves as a member of Cox Automotive senior management team. Dale has also written 3 books, Velocity Overdrive, The Road to Reinvention, and his latest book, Like I See It, Obstacles and Opportunities Shaping the Future of the Retail Automotive. Before I introduce Dale, let's review a few quick administrative items. First, everyone that registered for today's program will get a copy sometime next week, so watch for that in your email. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter those in the bottom right-hand corner under the Q&A section of your interface or your screen. If you have anyone that you feel at your store that would benefit from this program, please have them join us for the 4 p.m. session. That will be a recording, but have them join us today at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And please stay on the line after today's session for several important announcements. And now, join me in welcoming my good friend, Dale Pollak. Dale, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be here with you and everyone else, and good day to everybody. As Dan said, I would really appreciate hearing from you in a question format. So while I make my introductory remarks, please feel free to type in any questions that you have, and I will reserve plenty of time before the session ends to answer as many questions as possible. So today, the subject matter that I'd like to address is margin compression, something that seems to be on everyone's mind today. But before we talk about margin compression itself, I think it's proper to take a step back and just sort of take a high-look assessment at where our industry is today. You know, of late, there's a lot of talk about the transformation that will occur in our industry as a result of things like electrification of vehicles, autonomous vehicles, ride-sharing programs, and to be sure, those are all very significant and will be transformative issues for us to deal with in the future. But the key there is that it is the future. In the meantime, what we have on our hands is a very robust industry. You cannot discard or diminish the reality that we'll sell, you know, perhaps 17+ million new cars and possibly as many as 40 million used cars. That's one heck of a big business, and it's vibrant. But having said that, it's not without challenges, and the challenges come on many fronts. Just to name a few, I mean, one such challenge is just the plain fact that it's always has been and continues to be a cyclical industry, and we are coming off the last 7 years, which possibly could be the mother of all upcycles, possibly could be the largest number of vehicles sold over a 7-year period that any of us might ever see again in our professional careers. As a result of, you know, what happened in 07, 08, for a long time thereafter, nobody bought a car unless they absolutely had to, and when things got better and cars wore out and all that retail demand came back, it came back like a tsunami wave. So we have experienced for the prior 7 years, year-over-year sales volume improvement in both, well, certainly new and perhaps used cars as well, and that has been a big boom for auto dealers. This year, the year 2017, as predicted by many, looks like it will shape out as being the first of the past 7 years or 8 years that will not be year-over-year improvement in terms of volume. It's likely to be a plateau year. I think we saw a blip upwards in September and possibly October, but I believe that those are, relatively speaking, anomalous as a result of, things like flood replacement and big year-end incentives. But I think when it all comes in, it's going to be a plateau year. So as a result, dealers are having to make the adjustment to managing in a relatively flat sales volume year, which is something that we've not had to do in many years. It's been said by others that dealers are pretty effective in knowing how to manage in an upcycle and a down cycle, but not so much in a plateau environment, which we're in right now. So, that is just the first of several environmental challenges. We also have pressure because the nature of consumer demand for automobiles is changing. I've said for many years that I think that we are now in the essentially the second phase of the internet as far as retail sales is concerned. I think the first phase was characterized by consumers becoming educated and locating a vehicle largely online, and we have seen that in terms of the diminished number of visits that a typical shopper will make to a dealership or to dealerships before they actually pull the trigger. I think at one time it perhaps was as many as 4 visits, and now it's perhaps less than 2, which evidences the fact that the first phase of the internet really equipped and armed consumers to educate themselves and find vehicles online. This next phase that we're in, and I think we're in the early innings of this next phase, is really one where consumers are expressing preferences to purchase online. And when I say purchase online, I'm not necessarily saying that we're in an environment where too many consumers will actually click a button to buy the car, but I think what we're beginning to experience is an environment where shoppers want to at least get their deal started, if not roughly hammered out before they go into the dealership, so as to reduce some of that discomfort of negotiating and getting trade values in the dealership. I think they're expressing preferences of doing that more online on their terms. It comports with the social profile of this growing Gen Y buyer base that we have. I mean, these are largely young people who have grown up buying things online, and their expectation is to do that with automobiles as well. And this phenomenon puts a lot of pressure on dealers because not only do we have to support the current physical sales process in the dealership, but we're also having to learn how to deal with it online and really keep and develop both skills. So it's a transition, and dealers are learning how to do this. Technology, which we'll talk about here shortly, I think is just beginning to come online to help dealers do it, but nevertheless it places new pressures on dealers to learn how to interact with consumers in a transactional way, both online in addition to their present skill in the showroom. Yet another pressure on dealers are the ever-growing factory mandates. It's not lost on anybody who's a dealer today that ever more they have to dance to the tune of the OEM in terms of requirements of whether it be sales volume or inventory levels or customer satisfaction or building facility requirements. They have to exceed to the factory's demands and wishes in order to get what I often refer to as below-the-line money. So the nature of the relationship of the car dealer to their OEM franchisor has really changed. I think it's fair to say that in years past, the car dealer was very much of an independent business person, obviously with some guidelines outlined in a previous dealer agreement that put reasonable expectations and of conformity on the dealer. But today, it's really very different. Dealers have more of an agent relationship where they more or less have to do what the factory tells them to do in order to get the money back at the end of the quarter and the end of the year that they now depend on for their profitability. So this presents yet another stress on the franchise system. And if all that wasn't enough, I think there's just a fair amount of uncertainty in the general economy. Most specifically, at least on my mind these days, is the specter of rising interest rates. It's not lost on any of us that dealers are big borrowers of capital. You know, you all have big floor plan lines, you have rental factors, you have leasing of equipment, and most of these things tend to be interest rate sensitive. And also, as we all know, consumers or car buyers are very interest rate sensitive. So in an environment which holds the likely possibility of increased interest rates going forward, it's yet another pressure to think about in terms of what will happen to our business and our cost structure, not if, but likely when those interest rates go up. So, you know, those are just to name a few of the pressures on dealers, but the big one, and really the subject matter of this session, is to talk about perhaps the mother of all pressures on dealers, and that's margin compression. It has gone on for a number of years, but I think the effect of the compression has not largely been realized for the past several years, primarily due to the year-over-year sales volume. Sales volume, large volumes cover up a lot of ills, and with all those previous years of year-over-year sales volume improvement, I think that we have not really realized until now the reality of this margin compression, which has been occurring for many years. And now in this plateau year, although dealers report fairly robust sales volume levels, almost to a person, they're all also reporting low front-end margins. You know, where's the profit gone in this business? Well, the reality is that it has been slowly eroding. And the fact is that it is not likely to stop. To stop margin compression would be to believe that you could stop the effect of the internet, and that's obviously not possible. There's literally not a day that goes by that somebody out there isn't inventing a new way for a car shopper to know how to buy a car faster, cheaper from a dealer. And, you know, information is so widely shared that we all realistically should understand that compression of our margins is a reality, and it's one that is likely to continue. And sort of to underline the effect of that, NCM released a study recently where they did an analysis over the past several years, and if you reference the lower left-hand corner of this chart, what they have found and reported is that if the average dealer in America backed out their ads and deducts and backed out the below-the-line factory money that I referenced earlier, that the average dealer would be 6.5% roughly negative profit. You know, and you really have to just pause on that reality for a moment and think about the consequence of that. We are highly dependent today on that factory money because the margin that we used to have in new cars was largely taken away from us. The efficiency of the internet and the retail market has taken whatever else was left over in both new and used cars, and consequently we are really operating businesses today that are dependent on our factory partner and ever less dependent on our own professional abilities. So that sets up a really difficult and daunting environment for dealers. So with all those pressures, the question, you know, turns to what is it that we can control? How do we survive and thrive in this highly margin compressed environment? And it's pretty clear to me that the answer has to be in our ability to manage our operations in more of an efficient manner. I mean, if we can't stop the margin compression, if the volume is going to be largely what it is based on a cyclical reality, what is it that we can do? Well, we can focus on making our dealership operations more efficient. I mean, it is truly something that we do have control over. And then you ask the question, well, what does efficiency really mean in a dealership operation? And I think that efficiency can be largely broken down into 4 categories. The first place that I would look for efficiency in a car dealership is in the area of our human capital. The lowest common denominator, clearly, of dealer performance lies in our people. You know, I've always said that the only thing that ever really creates sustainable long-term improvement for a dealership is a proper strategy that's well executed. So it's a strategy, it's people, and it's process. Well, the people and the process are an area where we have a lot of upside opportunity. When you stop and reflect on the fact that roughly 2/3 of our sales force turns over every year, and maybe 40% or so of the dealership as a whole employment turns over, you just have to recognize the fact that that's unsustainable in a margin-compressed environment. We have to have high-performing, stable people. It's all too often that dealers fail to recognize the cost of losing a person, because when you lose a person, obviously you lose the productivity that they were there to produce, but you also have the cost, the lost cost of their hiring and their training and the relationships that they have built with consumers. All that is lost, and you have to essentially repeat that process, and it is very costly. So human capital is something that I'm very passionate about. I'm very happy about the fact that today there are some new technology solutions, and that's not to say that, you know, the answer lies in technology, because I think it really doesn't, but technology can help dealers in that people process strategy triumvirate that I referenced, and I think it's really an area that holds a lot of possibility, and I would encourage any dealership that hasn't done it already to analyze their commitment and their process to ensuring that they have the most stable and productive and happiest workforce as possible, because without it, it's clear that we just can't achieve our goals. Another area of efficiency is what I often talk about and refer to as process inefficiency. You know, every dealer, rightfully so, is maniacal about expense control, as they should be, because when you're operating a business that has roughly a 2.5% net to sales ratio, you know, you're keeping, on average, if you're average, you're keeping 2.5 pennies on every dollar that comes in the door. You have to be absolutely maniacal about every dollar you spend in terms of being as confident as possible that it's making a proper return, because you just don't have any money to waste. So dealers, for that reason, you know, are very careful and about their expenses and scrutinize them very closely. But having said that, what I believe that dealers often overlook is that the same effect of not paying attention to your monetary expenses, the same effect is worked on the dealership's bottom line when they don't perform processes in their dealership effectively. So let me explain what I mean there. I mean, if you stop and think about it, a dealership is a hugely process-oriented environment. In every department, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of processes that happen every single day. And if any of those processes in any of those departments are not done on a timely basis, if they're not done effectively, if they're not done at all, collectively, they add up to an effect on the bottom line that is no different than if your dealership ran without any expense control. So it is ironic that as carefully as dealers account for and analyze their expense, there's really little, if any, accounting or analysis on the business processes. You know, most every other operationally intensive industry in the world, you know, has certification programs, whether it be Six Sigma or ISO 9000. These are programs that are designed to identify, isolate, individual processes and tasks that need to be done, and create standards and measurement for effectiveness against those standards. But yet in the automobile industry, at least the retail automobile industry, we have no such equivalent. And I'm sure, as I said, that when we're not really good at process, it all adds up to the bottom line every bit as much as lack of expense control. And just one example of literally thousands, one that happens to be very close to an area that I pay close attention to, is an inventory. You know, when we don't have processes to manage age of inventory, we end up with you know, astounding outcomes where very often 20 to 30% of dealers' new and used vehicle inventory is overaged. And listen, 20 or 30% might not seem like a huge number, but when you think about the fact that a typical vehicle investment on the used side might be somewhere around $18,000 and perhaps as much as $30,000 on a new side, you know, when you talk about 20, 30% of your inventory at those levels of dollar investment being overaged, you're talking about a huge amount of capital that is underutilized and depreciating. And that's just an effect on the bottom line that it doesn't appear on your financial statement in terms of, you know, an expense, but in reality affects the bottom line ultimately every bit as much as it does on an expense. So I would really encourage dealers to think about that dichotomy between how careful they are in terms of spending money and yet all too often how lax they are in terms of isolating, managing, measuring, and having demands for constant improvement of all of those individual processes, because they do in fact add up. Yet another area of efficiency opportunity for dealers is in the promotional category. I mean, this is one that for me is really bewildering. No dealer would argue today that perhaps 90+% of the people who are considering or purchasing a vehicle today largely do that using the internet. And still today, the vast majority of dealers, you know, 2/3 perhaps of their promotional expense is done in a conventional format. And I just can't quite reconcile that with the reality of how people are buying cars today. And those traditional forms of media, not to say that they don't have any value, but they're certainly not the places that are proven today to be influencers of, or I should say efficient influencers of car buying decisions. They are, for the most part, mass media. And today, the digital environment in a number of different forms offers dealers much more targeted, much lower funnel buying consideration of shoppers, and for that matter, or for that reason, I should say, are much more efficient investments of dealers' promotional efforts. So I think that, you know, how they allocate their promotional sales and marketing dollars today is largely inefficient. And then the final area that I want to address before I take questions is also an area that is very near and dear to my heart, and it has to do with technology. I don't believe that technology alone is the answer to margin compression or dealer profitability, because for the most part, technologies are just tools. And as I said earlier, I believe that the only thing that really long-term sustainably moves the needle for a dealer is a proper strategy well executed. So it's strategy, people, and process. But somewhere in there, between strategy, people, and process are tools, technology tools. And there is a reality that I deal with every day that is partially, the responsibility for which is partially shared by dealerships themselves and partially shared by technology solution providers. But from a dealer's perspective, it's so frustrating for me that I see them making big investments in technology and their people very often are not properly trained, and sometimes that's a result of the turnover that I referenced earlier, but it is also all too often, just a result of the dealership not putting a priority on their people being properly trained, being held accountable for using those technology solutions as they should be used. It's probably the case that less than half of the capability of the technology solutions for which dealers invest are actually utilized in the dealership. And, you have to find ways to sell, deliver, and service vehicles and customers in a more efficient manner. And technology holds that promise if it's properly used and measured in the dealership. But as I said, I believe that the inefficiency of technology is a challenge that has shared responsibility between the dealer and the solution provider. So as a solution provider, I think it's our obligation to be sure that if we sold you something, that your people are trained, to be sure that your people are using the systems, to be sure that the people are using the systems consistently and fully, and most importantly, I think it's the responsibility of a solution provider to be sure that there is actually a return on investment that can be attributed. And if I were a dealer, I would select my vendors accordingly, and I would hold them accountable, because they are, in fact, more than vendors. They need to be vendor partners in this very, highly challenged, margin-compressed environment. Their existence depends on your existence, and if they don't recognize that, and if they don't commit themselves to helping ensure that your people are using it and using it properly, then I don't think that it's a proper vendor-partner relationship. So, us vendors, we have to be accountable and responsibility to dealers for that reason. There's another responsibility that I believe solution providers in our industry bear, and that is to do a better job in terms of having our systems connect and talk to each other. You guys have way too many systems, that evidence themselves in having, needing too many different passwords. If they have a lot of different passwords, that's a pretty early sign that these solutions are not providing you the value that they should, because it probably also means that they're not sharing data. And the ability to share data from, the sales to the service department and to all the other departments is critical in terms of you having efficiency. There's so much opportunity to be leveraged from that data, but of course these systems have to talk to each other and they have to share data. And that also is a responsibility of a solution provider. So if I were a dealer looking for efficiency in technology, I would be asking the hard questions of those providers. Who do you integrate with? How easy is it to do that integration? And very importantly, how expensive is it to do that integration? It absolutely galls me today that there are major solution providers out there that, under the guise of data security, are charging excessive fees for data integration. It is absolutely inexcusable. It is a ruse, in my opinion, that they're doing it under the guise of keeping your data secure. I think that it's really about lining their own pockets with additional fees that they charge these integration charges. Yeah, there is a cost to integration and there's a cost to data security, but it no way rises to the level of what some of these major solution providers are extracting in terms of what I would consider to be a tax from the dealer community in terms of allowing you to integrate your various systems. So yet another area of efficiency that I would strongly urge dealers to pursue is to insist that their solution providers, if they charge any fees for integration and data security, they are in the realm of reason, because what's happening right now is just absolutely shameful, and it is coming at a time when dealers can least afford to pay those tolls or taxes that are being extracted allegedly under the guise of data security. So technology is a reality of the world. Technology holds the promise, if properly delivered, built, delivered, and used in the dealership, holds the promise of allowing us to conduct our businesses at an ever more efficient level, which is absolutely required. So these four areas of efficiency and our human capital and our dedication to excellence in terms of process, promotional efficiency, how we spend our large dollars of sales and marketing, and how we invest our precious dollars in technology are really areas of big opportunity for improvement. And then I guess my final remarks on the subject, and it's consistent with the message of my most recent book, Like I See It, is really a recognition that we're all in this together. There is a lot of money in this business, but I believe that there is ever less profit. And for many decades, all of the industry constituents, and there are many, dealers, manufacturers, solution providers, financial institutions, and many, many more, we all have been relatively successful in getting out of this industry what we need in terms of profit. But with ever less profit to go around, I don't really think that we can all keep pulling on our end of the rope independently, hoping to get out what we need to get out. We need to appreciate the fact that ever more, this is an ecosystem, and our existence depends on the whole. And for that reason, we are ever more interdependent. And my message in the book, Like I See It, is really to draw recognition to the fact that we have to be mindful of this reality of lower profit. We have to be mindful and respectful of our need to understand that we're in it together and we're interdependent on each other. And I don't think that, you know, I'm unrealistic in believing that all of the industry constituents will all one day put their arms around each other and sing Kumbaya together. I don't think that's ever going to happen, nor do I necessarily think it's necessary, but it is necessary for us to understand that if one of us extracts, you know, too great of a toll for what we do for each other, it's going to come at the cost of the whole. So I would really encourage everybody to have a perspective that it is a great industry. I will always bet on the dealer in terms of their ingenuity and their ability to adapt to new environments, but all of us have to understand that we need each other and we're in it together to win. So that concludes my formal remarks. What I'd like to do is to use the remaining time to answer questions. So Dan, if you could help me, assist me with that, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely, Dale. And again, thanks for your closing remarks there. I think everybody on the call couldn't agree more. We did receive several questions here. I think they're outstanding questions. Have you seen any dealers, Dale, who've done a good job hiring and retaining personnel? What are a couple things that they're doing right that perhaps other dealers aren't doing today?
Well, you know, we could have a whole seminar on that, but you know, it's interesting that if you stop and think about it, we put a lot of process around selling a vehicle, and yet when it comes to hiring, whether it be in the recruiting phase or the interviewing phase or the management phase, we put little formalized process around it. And, you know, I think it was Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, you know, who said that GE's #1 product that they manufacture are their people. And what he meant by that is that they put a great deal of process around it. So, you know, just one example of the lack of process that we put around it and what some progressive dealers are doing is in the recruiting phase. I mean, think about this, that if a shopper submitted a lead for a car, there would be an expectation in the dealership that somebody get back to that shopper, you know, lickety-fast. But it's probably the case that if somebody submits an application for employment to the dealership, they might not get contacted for a week. And also, you know, the recruiting sites, or the recruiting assets that we have online. You know, question that I would ask you, are they optimized for a mobile device? Because most people who apply for a job today, you know, Gen Y people, are probably applying from a mobile device. And if they can't do that efficiently and effectively on a mobile device, they're not going to apply at a job at your dealership. And similarly, if they don't get a response back quickly, probably they are going to get a response back quickly from somebody else, perhaps in a different industry or more progressive dealers. So, I mean, if you just start at the beginning process of hiring, you know, just the recruitment, you can begin to identify how little attention we put to it. And I think you could take that same paradigm and bring it all the way through the interviewing process, the hiring process, the screening process, and the management process. And today, there are solution providers, not many, a few, and I happen to be involved with one of them. So in full disclosure, I will tell you that I'm on the board of a company, Hirology, that has created software to bring process and discipline to this. And my involvement in that company is not out of a desire to make money. It'd be great if that happens, but it happens to be an area that I'm passionate about. And as I previously referenced, I think that there is, you know, might be one of the great last bastions of opportunity in our business to have a higher level of performance. So it's something I'm very passionate about. And if a dealer doesn't have processes around recruiting, interviewing, screening, hiring, and managing people, you know, in a process way, as they would do in terms of managing a lead or a prospect or a sale, I would encourage them to be very much around that. So the question is, what do, you know, some of the most progressive dealers do? It's process, process, process.
Hey, Dale, another one that came up. I saw a story in Automotive News this week that paints a not-so-great picture for dealers in the years ahead. Do you have a take on that either way, or did you even see that article in the Automotive?
Yeah, of course I saw the article. And as I referenced in the very beginning part of this session, there is no question that major transformation is going to occur in our industry. I think there are several factors that are going to converge to create that transformation, those largely being the electrification of the vehicle, autonomous vehicles, and the rise of ride sharing. It's going to change the entire nature of our business. But although that stuff is very intriguing and maybe exciting or maybe frightening to talk about and discuss, I honestly don't think it's hugely productive for us at this point to be spending a lot of time on it. It's not that we don't need to watch it and anticipate it, but it's still very early and it's still pretty sketchy, and I don't think that any of us really would know how to appropriately respond. That one is going to have to take some time to mature in order for us to know how to respond to it and be worthy of spending a lot of time. What I'm much more focused on is what's happening in the immediate term. And as I said, we have a very vibrant business, but it's also one that has many pressures. So personally, I would resist the temptation to spend a lot of time speculating on something that we have little knowledge or understanding of how it's going to shape out, and rather spend the majority of our time talking about the realities and the challenges that face us today. And then my last remark on this subject is what I would never do is bet against the car dealer. The car dealer has proven to be a survivor. They've proven to be innovative. They've proven to be adaptive. And I'm confident that the car dealer will play a prominent role going forward. But let's focus on the important right now, and that's how we're going to make money and survive in this very challenged current environment.
And then one last question here, Dale, that came through. What would you recommend as the best way for me to address margin compression? I think what he's looking for here with this question is maybe which of those 4 areas is the easiest to address, maybe get a quick win.
Yeah, you know, I don't know realistically that there, you know, is a lot of easy stuff here or a lot of quick wins, because I think they're all important and they're all relatively hard you know, you have to put a lot of time and effort into it. I wish it was otherwise, but I really don't think it is. But I will tell you, you know, in an area where I spend the majority of my time, that being, you know, new and used vehicle operations, I could tell you that the one thing that you cannot tolerate is aged inventory. You know, in a vehicle, particularly a used vehicle, in a sense, has always been like a block of ice. You know, it's only viable for a certain period of time before it depreciates or evaporates. But I think the reality that we must recognize today is that block of ice is sitting in a temperature of 120, in a room with a temperature of 120 degrees and rising. So if you're going to extract any value from that vehicle investment, you have to do it fast. And by definition, that means that you can't allow cars to get aged. You can't allow them to sit around. You know, if a used vehicle ever ran out of juice, so to speak, at 60 days, which I think was industry conventional wisdom, maybe still is, I'm sure that 45 has got to be the new 60. In order to make any return on a vehicle that makes its investment worthwhile, you have to be in and out of that vehicle in 30 days and certainly no more than 45. So, you know, if there is such a thing as, you know, a fast, quick win, and I really don't think there is, but I would say to dealers, if you've got cars sitting around on your lot older than 60 days, you're probably you're certainly not realizing the potential that your dealership is capable of producing.
Dale, does that go to both new and used? Or
certainly does.
Okay.
Certainly does.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, listen, that's the questions that we have that came through. Dale, again, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And let me just add this. We really appreciate your honest comments there at the close about relationship and about the industry as a whole. I think all of us on this call couldn't agree with you more. And we really, really appreciate your time this morning. For everybody on the call, please remember we're going to repeat this again at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have anybody at your store that you believe would benefit, have them join us at 4 p.m. This will be a recording at the 4 p.m., but again, this was outstanding material, and please have them register and get on the phone at 4. Join us on December the 19th. That's a Tuesday for, again, a 10 a.m. and a 4 p.m. session, Eastern Standard Time. We're going to have 2017 in review, any specific trends, and projections for 2018. We're going to feature our panel, David Lim, Chief Auto Analyst for Wells Fargo, Tom Contos, Senior Vice President, Chief Economist for CAR, and Jonathan Smoke, Chief Economist for Cox Automotive. Should be an outstanding session. Please join us again on Tuesday, December the 19th. And they'll be giving us 2018 projections and trends that they expect to see going into next year. Again, everybody, thank you for joining us today. Dale, again, thank you, and great selling for the remainder of the month. Take care now, and have a great holiday period as we go into the Thanksgiving holiday. Thank you. Bye-bye.